Good morning. This is Martin Drummond with Progressive News. It's Friday, August 16th, 2019. And I just want to explain a couple things about being a Democrat. Something that, for one thing, it's something that an establishment Democrat can't explain, has no right to explain. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, establishment Democrats have no right to even be in the party at all. It's a kind of a chicken and the egg thing. Yes, a long time ago, like Lincoln, Democrats were that was just a totally different party. The Democratic Party, as it is today, is all about Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the New Deal, Martin Luther King for race, the issue of race and poverty, and in terms of the influence that formed the Democratic Party, the two-party system, that history, conservatism has no place in the Democratic Party. It's just holding on like a bad cold or something. An illness, sickness. Because, isn't it obvious that it's the opposition to the Republican Party, the conservatives? Now, a lot of people would like to say, well, no, you can't tell conservatives they can't be in the party, that they can't be a part of the party. But, I have the sense for good and evil. And the only reason that conservatives, or even in mild forms of conservatism, whatever you want to call it, are in our party is to subvert what's good about our party. So, there's no place, and there's certainly no place for conservatism or racism, these what are called blue dog Democrats, some kind of hold on. You're telling me that after becoming the party of FDR and MLK and spending 100 years, 50 years fighting for the people of the United States, that the people like me who consider ourselves real Democrats. Okay, so for people like me who are 50 years and older, I'm actually 58, you're telling me that we're supposed to accept evil in our own party? No. And this goes back to what I was talking about in an earlier segment not too long ago about people trying to tell people like me to shut up when it comes to talking about what should be. No, man, talking about what should be is the most important thing in my life. That's how I care about the human race, about the American people, American citizens. So, you want to try and tell me that, then fuck off, right? I'm not gonna sit quietly and tell people that, or let people tell me that I can't talk about what should be. What should be, in doing that, what you can about what should be, is the difference between just rolling over for evil letting them basically, I mean, they'd kill you, right? I mean, they're evil. They'd kill you if you let them, right? That's the worst case scenario. So no, I'm not going to do that. Now, as far as the party goes, so the party is the party of FDR and MLK, and now Bernie Sanders and Rashida Tlaib and all these people, right? We're working together to try and live together, right? I'm not saying that I agree with everything that Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar say, or certainly probably don't believe in everything that they believe, because that's part of the fight, right? Is reason people like Trump hate them so much is because they believe that the Trumpies, the conservatives, believe that they believe certain things, like they believe that that Omar and people like her hate Israel, and maybe she does, maybe she doesn't, right? I mean, we don't really know what's in her heart, but I would bet that she doesn't really hate anybody, but the Trumpies believe that she hates, and wants the worst for Israel. In fact, I would bet that she doesn't actually, but that she does believe or want the Palestinians to get their land back. Something that probably isn't in the cards. See, now that's where I'm flexible on the whole what should be thing. I mean, when you look at Israel and Palestine, definitely the Palestinians should be given their land back, right? And should be given their country back. And just like that one old reporter who used to report for the White House, that old lady, old Lebanese American lady, said, if we could, we would reverse time. Every European in Israel would just go back to Europe and live in Europe. I did that. We lived in Lebanon. We lived in Lebanon for 4.5 years. We could have become Lebanese. We could have stayed there. If it wasn't for the war, we might have. But we went back. Anything can happen, right? I mean, you can live. You could live anywhere. Anyway, so my point is that what is my point? Well, as far as the party goes, really all this, what happened in 1992, and this is recent, right? So let's talk about it for a second. What happened in 1992 with the maybe I should show you something here. So in 1992 we had Democratic Leadership Council. And basically they took over the party. The Clintons. And we're still tolerating the fucking bullshit. Sam Smith. He's a journalist and editor with Let me just turn that down a little bit more.
Progressive Review. That's ProRev, PROREV.com, the Progressive Review. Author of several books. And his Twitter is...
Well, this is a story sort of stuck.
Yeah, Hartman spends more time plugging himself and sometimes his guests than he does talking about. I mean, he's... Never mind.
Me that you were interested in it because I've been working on aspects of his story for over 20 years and nobody's been interested. But if you go back all the way to 1988, there was a group that was formed called the Democratic Leadership Council.
This was Al Fromm's group, right? Al Fromm and Bill Clinton.
Right. And the idea was to move the Democratic Party to the right. And it had...
Now, my conclusions on all this is that the fact that the Koch brothers were participating in this, and probably other conservatives, is that it was an actual intelligence operation, that the conservative movement, or whatever you want to call them, the ultra-rich, actually had a intel operation, because I think that they have an intelligence service independent of government and independent of the Republican Party, independent that the Bushes were very much involved in, and lots of other conservatives were all involved in, that actually funded and organized this subversion of the Democratic Party. And at the time I was a Democrat. You know, I was in my 30s and what have you, 20s, 30s, and I didn't realize it was going on. But I say that they funded the Clintons and had them subvert the Democratic Party. I mean, wouldn't you? You know, if you were... I mean, it's clearly underhanded, right? But it definitely worked. You know, now almost, except for progressives, the entire Democratic Party is not, you know, if it ever was really progressive. You know? Because I can say that from the 50s on, the progressive movement has been harassed and intimidated this way, this exact way. I still believe that the Kennedy assassination was, you know, the same thing, funded and organized by conservatives. You know, they killed our president that we had in power. And I firmly believe that all these Democrats, and going back even before we were Democrats, when we were Republicans, so Lincoln, all of them had a vice president forced upon them. You know, Lincoln had Johnson. Isn't it kind of funny that LBJ too was a Johnson? You know, what's wrong with the Johnsons in this country, right? So all these people had these, you know, if you go back to Lincoln, after Lincoln was assassinated, within 2 weeks, this 32-second level, and this is how these conspiracy theories get started. 32nd level Mason is president of the United States, and all of a sudden the whole Civil War is being reverted by this asshole, right? Kennedy, while he was too conservative for me in most ways, even though in a lot of ways he wasn't, he dies, and within weeks we're back in Vietnam. He was pulling us out of Vietnam. He was making peace with Cuba. So you know, and I'm not saying that we're necessarily right on all these things. I mean, maybe there's a war with the Cubans and a war with the Russians and the Chinese and everybody that we really do have to fear. But maybe there isn't, right? Maybe there's a way that we can have peace and prosperity and help everybody rise up. So anyway, so I believe firmly that the Democratic Party should be the party of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Martin Luther King, and that we should, I believe firmly in all of the progressive values, just like obviously Bernie Sanders does, and all the progressives, the true progressives. I mean, there's progressives that aren't quite progressive. Ro Khanna, I sometimes wonder about him, especially when he votes for, he's made some shitty votes. And here's what the main point of this segment is really about, okay? And
welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Great to have you all with us. Some might say Netanyahu was equivocating, waiting for his handler's signal. Then his handler popped out this tweet. It would show great weakness if Israel allowed Representative Omar and Representative Tlaib to visit. They hate Israel and all Jewish people, and there's nothing that can be said or done to change their minds. Minnesota and Michigan will have a hard time putting them back in office. They are a disgrace, ! Says Mr. Trump. And lo and behold, Netanyahu said that the congressional representatives, Rashida Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, were banned from coming to Israel. Earlier this week, another group of congressional representatives went to Israel. 41 Democrats and 31 Republicans went on an AIPAC-sponsored trip to Israel.
Okay, so here's my main point. I mean, these 41 Democrats, they should have said, no, we're not going to go to Israel. If you're going to try and keep 2 of us or 3 of us or 5 of us, whatever, out of Israel, we refuse to go. And all this stuff about AIPAC, and I mean, it's all the same, these establishment Democrats. And doesn't this illustrate how our party was subverted in 1982 with the Democratic Leadership Council?
It worked with people like at the same time Pamela Harriman was having over nearly 100 meetings with people who paid $1,000 a head to come to them to discuss who the candidate should be in 1992. And she raised about $12 million. But meanwhile, the Democratic Leadership Council was working on aspects of how you make the Democratic Party more conservative. And what I didn't learn until earlier this year was that one of the people who had helped fund it in the early period was Koch Industries with the Koch brothers.
So, is it any surprise? I mean, how thoroughly did they overthrow my party, right? They don't even represent people like me in the Democratic Party. And, you know, I'd say 90% of the people in the Democratic Party in 1991 were people like me, right? We're FDR, MLK Democrats. We didn't like Lyndon Johnson. We liked JFK. You know, we didn't like, and in a lot of ways, we didn't like a lot of good we liked a lot of good Republicans. We liked and helped elect guys like Eisenhower, but we hated Nixon, who was his vice president and who really ran things towards the end. I think they, and I think that all these, I don't believe in any coincidences. Now, I may be wrong, but I think FDR was poisoned, subverted. Why is it that these perfectly healthy guys, when they're elected, well, maybe not perfectly healthy, but all of a sudden they get sick and have a problem? Why did Eisenhower get sick at the end of his presidency and end up the guy we didn't like, the guy we didn't vote for? Nixon end up taking over and running things? Because there's a whole intelligence agency. I call it the, what did I come up with? The international, I'll have to remember what I called it. Security apparatus, I think is what I called it. ISA, the international security apparatus. I would say it's mainly been run by the Bushes, but there's been lots of people involved. It's a huge organization. If you want to point to a star chamber, it would be it, Illuminati, whatever. Illuminati is something that is a very loose-knit kind of organization, but it certainly comes together to perform these operations. So, as far as this operation, the subversion of the Democratic Party, all these people, like, I'll bet you could just look at the names in the 41 people who went, and they're either members or they're budding members. If there's any progressives who went, they're not true progressives. They've signed off saying that they're willing to play ball with the other side, probably not aware of this situation that I'm explaining to you. Probably being warmed up to the idea. So, anyway, I think that you understand what I'm trying to say, right? Basically, these 41 people are, in any proper definition of the situation, proper description of what's going on, they're basically spies. They're basically traitors to the Democratic Party. See, the progressive movement is the real Democrats. And this goes back to what I was saying in the beginning of this segment, and that's the Democratic Party really needs to be completely opposed to the conservative movement. It's the only thing that stands in their way, right? And the conservative movement is evil. I mean, I'm talking about my own father. I loved my father. He's dead now. I loved him. I still love him, sort of. And as much as you can love a dead person. But just because I love somebody doesn't mean that I'm going to ignore what is inherently evil about, being conservative and stuff. And he was a typical conservative. They can go along about their lives saying, well, our goals are good, and completely ignore the fact that their goals are evil. Right? So my dad believed that taking care of his own. My dad lived in a very much a philosophy that goes along with the American Civil War. These people believed that there basically are two Americas, and that one America's evil, that all people like me, his own son, are evil, and we're not supporting our own country, and that we're against our own country. How did my dad put it? Your idea of patriotism is really weird, or he said something to that effect to me. And I was like, thinking at the time when he said that, yeah, to you, it would be. The idea of caring about every American, and not just your group of Americans, to him and conservatives is foreign. To care about what he perceives as his enemy, right? Minorities, mainly. They're white nationalists, is really what they are. And they're all over the place still. I mean, they're dying off rapidly, but they've recruited a whole new bunch of people out of the younger generations, and we're having to fight that, right? And it is a war, as I described in the recording that got me thrown in jail. But when I say a war, it's in the looser sense. It's in the same kind of, and yet at the same time I am referring to the idea of a real war and the possibility of a real war. I mean, that's always there with conservatives, because they're ready to fight. And they're ready to throw as many of their imbecile followers into the fray as they can get to listen to their stupidity, right? So yeah, there's two different things, but when I talk about a war, I'm constantly hoping it's just going to be a political war and a war of ideas, etc. Whereas I look at them and their rhetoric, and I see people who are thinking more in terms of, and that's because they're evil. Evil always thinks in terms of blood and gore, and I mean, that's what they do, right? You ever seen Event Horizon? It's kind of like where the real world and this horrific evil dimension come into conflict and exist in our real world, or try to perturb, insert themselves into the real world. Well, that's kind of how evil works. I don't believe in the Bible's version so much and all that, but evil does have a way of, the Iraq War, torture, death, people being slaughtered like cattle. I mean, we just put a guy in jail because they just slaughtered 13 people at a roundabout, I think it was called Al Noor Blackwater. You know, doesn't really matter whether they believed that they were under attack or not. The point is that 13 people who were just sitting in their cars in traffic were just gunned down by these guys. You know, and that's why one of them, you know, finally the fact that, you know, these people bring hell on earth was finally punished. We finally got some justice. He's going to set, if there is any God, he's going to set in jail for the rest of his life. And what, 10 years after it happened, 15 years after it happened. So yeah, there is no justice. I agree, life isn't fair, but as I've pointed out many times, that's why we push and push and push and fight and what have you for a better world, right? Because courts should be a place where you get justice, as opposed to what they are right now. They just simply fight for, the courts just simply provide the conservative movement. They punish innocent people. I mean, I spent 3 months in jail. Not because I did anything wrong, but because I criticized the system. They don't want to admit that, you know, but that's the real reason, you know, for doing what I'm doing right now. That's why I spent time in jail, talking like this. So, you know, and I could have walked. All I had to do was say, okay, I plead guilty. Can you imagine asking me to plead guilty to something I didn't do? I didn't threaten to blow up a building or to go on a shooting spree. I simply was talking about how what they're doing makes people so angry. Well, here, let me explain it like this. When these, like when this gunman in El Paso went in and killed a whole bunch of Mexican Americans and Mexicans in El Paso. Okay, why did he do it? He did it because what he was seeing made him so angry that he, you know, whether you want to say he went crazy or he just made the decision or whatever, and he killed all those people, right? Hell on earth. Horror. Okay? So what I was talking about was what makes people so angry. And I'm not saying they're right. In fact, I'm using an example right now where they're he was absolutely wrong. Unless you think like a conservative. Because I've just already explained that just in the same segment. You know, they believe that their anger is justified. I don't believe that my anger is justified. When I talk about how angry they make me, and in this case I was talking about how angry they make other people, but I used myself as an example because that's easy, right? Because I know how I feel. And so I was just talking about my feelings. Now my feelings are just the ones that I'm talking about when I get what I got arrested for. I'm just saying that they exist. I mean, they happen so quick. You know, it's like, and I have control. I don't act on them, but I get those feelings, and I know I'm not alone. I know probably everybody gets those feelings, but they're not willing to admit it. When somebody gets you really pissed off, right? When somebody's right in your face, when somebody's threatening you, when somebody steals, when somebody commits a crime against you, you get, like if your car were stolen, if you were to walk out and see your car isn't out front or something, whatever, or you go to the food stamp place. This is exactly what I was talking about before, and you get the impression that these people don't like you, and they don't like you getting food stamps. Their job is to make sure you get food stamps if you qualify, right? Which I do, of course, for now. So it makes you angry, right? And when you first feel like these people are against you, you do get these feelings. I mean, sometimes you even think about doing, like killing somebody. You think, well, what are my options here? I know I'm not going to get justice from the police or the courts, so my only option is to get justice myself, right? So all I was doing was talking about that, talking about how people's minds work, the anger that they feel, and all that kind of stuff, okay? And that's obviously not the same thing as threatening to kill somebody or blow somebody up. Even though those were things I talked about, I'm not actually threatening anybody. I'm not threatening to do it. I'm just simply having it, So basically, they're saying you can't talk about that. You can't discuss it. Well, what are psychologists supposed to do? If they can't talk about it, how can we have a science that tries to correct such things? Well, obviously you can't. And obviously you can't make it illegal for people to talk about it. And that's what they did, because they really don't like anybody saying that they make people so angry that they want to kill them, even though they know it's true, because people have beat people to death, have beat social workers or whatever, the interviewers and the people, and they have come in and raised such hell that people had to be arrested and there were fights and whatever. So even though it's true and everybody knows it, they don't want people saying it out loud. They don't want people saying out loud, "Oh, you make me so angry that I want to kill you." Even though they may or may not actually act upon that, right? Anyway, that's a whole nother subject, but and I'm so far away from the point now. But of course, this is something that the reason I keep going back to it is for a number of reasons, but mainly because it's emotional for me, because they kidnapped me and they held me prisoner, hostage, right? And in a way, that's the height of example of this war that's going on. In terms of my personal experience, it's the worst thing in a way that they've gotten away with, at least recently. I mean, we can go back to when I was a kid, and I used to have to, some conservative asshole's kid who's also conservative would tell me, "I'll be waiting for you outside the gate after school," and I'd get beat up because I didn't know how to fight, back then. So, this is a war, and it has gotten physical. That's been going on in my life for 50 years, you know? I mean, I can even go back to first grade and talk about the one little black guy in my class, Gray. His last name was Gray. And it's all very symbolic, really. But we became friends. And then at some point, he didn't like me so much that we were fighting, and I told him, and he lived in a bad neighborhood, a black neighborhood. Back then there was no busing. It was like right before busing. And I can remember the two of us walking home from school, and him going across to the head home to the bad neighborhood, and yelling at me, and me telling him, fuck off, I don't want to be your friend anymore. Right? So this stuff goes back a long ways. All these different issues, right? And why we are the way we are, and why I am the way I am, it all relates, right? In a very surreal kind of way when you get into memories of when you were 6 years old, which even then I wasn't a racist, and it would be interesting to understand exactly what happened between me and that little black kid. Something gray. I should look at my first grade picture. I don't remember there being a black kid in our class. Maybe he wasn't in my class. Maybe he was in a different class. Anyway, now I really am getting off the subject. But as far as this stuff goes, right? These 41 Democrats, they're not Democrats. They're a conservative party that took over the Democratic Party, subverted it. It's hard to think of them that way because they have portrayed themselves as the Democratic Party. They've actually gotten elected, and that's how the conservatives win at what they do, right? In my case, they, got a jury together to put the stamp on me, guilty. This guy threatened to blow up the Department of, the food stamp offices. Threatened to go on a shooting spree. When nothing could be further from the truth, right? You get the people to elect a whole bunch of people who are actually conservatives and against the Democratic Party as the senators and congressmen and presidents, and that's your stamp, right? It's official. It's justice. So it's justice that I was thrown in jail for something I didn't do. It's justice that the people like me who are Democrats don't have anybody to represent us in Congress or the Senate or as president or in the Supreme Court or in our police force or in our legal system, right? They just simply make it legal. See what I'm saying? And officially, a jury sentence is technically, under the laws and everything, I'm guilty of doing something I did not do. Technically, the Democratic Party is a conservative party that represents the establishment, the rich, right? And we're all just a bunch of little peons trying to interfere with all that. At least that's how it's supposed to look. We all know it's all bullshit. I didn't threaten anybody. The Democratic Party doesn't represent the rich and powerful. The people in it don't. And I gotta say that sooner or later, it'll all be straightened out. And that in a real way, in a very real way, it is already straightened out. I mean, the truth is that I didn't threaten anybody. I didn't. And the truth is that the Democratic Party and the people in it, or even if you want to say the people are not in it anymore because they left, they became Green Party, Socialist Party, whatever. That's the real Democratic Party. I mean, the movement is full of disaffected Democrats, right? People who can't tolerate the Democratic Party as it is right now. So in a very real way, no matter how much they corrupt our side, corrupt us through this stamp, He threatened to blow up the food stamp offices and kill some food stamp people. Bullshit. I never did anything of the sort. You just want to believe that, or you want other people to believe that. Even conservatives don't actually believe that. They just want other people to. They want to put that stamp on my forehead. They want to tattoo that to my forehead. Violent, angry. Angry, yeah, but violent? No. It's nonsense. I'm sure that any rational person could see that. So, what has to be done? Obviously, we have to take back our party. 2016 was the beginning. Bernie Sanders was the beginning. And, they're already scared. They see people like the Squad and other more progressive people. And they're constantly at work trying to corrupt all that. They're constantly at work trying to buy these people off and all this stuff. Which is why, I made signs like "Not for Sale" Bernie Sanders and stuff like that. And we can only hope that Bernie Sanders and these people are not for sale. I mean, we even hoped for a long time that people like Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton weren't for sale, but let's face it, the proof's in the pudding. And their way of doing stuff, creating an America where low income is your reward. Right? For mass incarceration is your reward for supporting these people. Water you can't drink out of the faucet is your reward. All this stuff, all this shit. That's how we determine that they're not really doing the work of protecting the people against these rich people and their corporations and the capitalist system, right? I mean, that was always our hope, right? That we would be able to elect people who would protect us. Would protect us from people who would like us to die because we can't afford the right kind of insulin or epi sticks or whatever, health care. We're hoping that somebody will protect us from that. I mean, we are absolutely the gasoline that runs this car. We're the 99% who get up every morning and do all the work that keeps the country running. And yet we can't even protect ourselves from this small group of people. That's what it's about. We need to protect ourselves, and it's very much a dire issue. Protecting ourselves from this small group of people. Okay, I think that's a good place to end this segment. I think that, and it does seem to take an hour to get around to explaining everything. It's complicated, right? It's complicated, and isn't that funny? My songs are very much gonna clean this mess up, gonna fix it anyway. Eco-terrorists. I mean, all of my songs are political. Social, political, right? And I've talked about this video before.
They're all in a war right now over this house. Mom's kicking them all out. So what the?
Got idiots.
Mom's kicking them all out and they don't like it now. My little brother, he took off. I don't know where he's at. He's supposed to be, I don't know. My sister, I went in there and put a chain on it, keep them all out of it, and this is what we get for it.
Yeah.
I take the doorknob out and I run a chain all the way around it. I had the keys to it. Let's see when to get in that door or not.
Yeah, that was, I see a lot of smoke coming up as I'm driving down the freeway to work. And so I go check it out and I find this house on fire. House next to it is catching on fire. Decided to use it in my video. My music video. And it turns out the guy who is most involved with the house that's on fire is standing right next to me while I'm filming it and starts talking about it. And it's just such an American story, right? Conservative parents have all the money and the kids have none, and the conservative parent is probably doing their best to provide for the kids, but I mean, listen.
Shut you up in any way. It's to the man let's make him pay. Good day to die, got the name. I hope that you realize I'm not here to terrorize. I don't care what they have to say. So gonna fix it anyway.
So this, so if what he said makes any sense, so he kicked this grandmother or mother's kids out of this house that's next door. The sides all caught on fire, and I'm just guessing that they went into this house because it was freezing. There was snow on the ground still, and probably started a fire to stay warm and lit the place on fire accidentally. Either that or they were angry and they purposely burnt this house down. And she owns both houses. And, it's starting to catch the good house on fire here. It was burning all through the attic. You could see it. And this house was definitely very abandoned. Of course, now it's going to be useless. I mean, it's definitely burned. But it's just kind of an American story. You know what I mean?
Taking them all out to watch it.
So like I say, there are no coincidences in life. I end up standing right next to the guy who knows more about what's really going on. And boy, he wants to talk, doesn't he?
They're all in a war right now over this house. Mom's taking them all out to watch it.
Got idiots.
Mom's kicking them all out and they don't like it now. My little brother, he took off. I don't know where he's at. He's supposed to be, I don't know. My sister, I went in there and put a chain on it, keep them all out of it, and this is what we get for it.
Yeah.
I take the doorknob out and I run a chain all the way around it. I had the keys to it. I don't know if they wanted to get in that door or not.
And by the way, I went to the news people and said, I've got this video from this fire, and got this guy talking about the stuff, and they refused to even look at it. That's another thing about, that's a whole nother story. They just don't want, they want to have total control over the news. They don't want people like me coming in. This video goes on to talk about how when I was at YMCA Camp Ferris in Lebanon, the guy, you saw that picture, right? There were two other guys in our tent. They were older. They were there to help us, right? They were like our tent monitors. They worked for the YMCA in Lebanon. And one of them, as it turns out, was the guy who murdered John Lennon. I mean, my life is so coagulated with all this weirdness. I don't know why. I mean, maybe I'm destined to understand this world through all this weirdness that seems to have stuck to the bottom of my shoe, There's just, and a lot of it ends up in my music videos. And this was just a coincidence, because Look at His Face is a song I wrote when I was tripping on LSD in New York City, when I lived in Manhattan on the Upper East Side. Just so many coincidences, right? And I just happened to use all this is the backdrop, and the backdrop ended up being that I was in the same tent with the guy who murdered John Lennon for, I don't know, a month. I forget how long we spent at camp. 2 weeks, I think. Very long weeks, because this was kind of rough. Scorpions and bad food. Anyway, so this is Martin Drummond with Progressive News. I hope you enjoyed my segment. I hope that you can connect the dots, because I very much have the dots, and they do connect. So I hope that you can listen to what I'm saying and understand them in the way that I understand them, because if you do, you'll see how much it makes sense. It really does all fit together. Anyway, yeah, have a nice day.